Good. Cool. So who's excited about cloud security? Ooh. Good, 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 good. Of course you are. Again, you work for me. But the others? Good. So if you're excited about cloud security, again, you came to the right place. If you're not, it's unfortunate for you that you need to hear me speak about it for the next 50 minutes. So today we're going to talk about cloud security. We're going to talk about the way to do cloud security. We'll use what is called the CNAPP approach, Cloud Native Application Protection. We'll talk about this approach more. We'll show you some examples how this approach makes sense and why it's important, and will give you value at the end of the day and will help protect your cloud. And at the end, I also want to make sure that we take some action items. Again, that's also part of the presentation. And I hope that we'll have some time for questions and at the end. So let's start with why cloud security is challenging. What are the problems with cloud security? So if you think about the transition in the last probably 15 years, I think the cloud has been around for the last probably 15 years, maybe a little bit more. Still, for some of the organizations, cloud is relatively new. Again, we use, as security practitioners, we're used to protect the on-prem. Again, that's the old word. In the cloud, there are different stuff. There are different technology, different things that we leverage. Again, we have identity. This is different. Identity is the new perimeter in the cloud, which is different than in the on-prem. In the on-prem, you had your network access. You had your network perimeter. You had your firewalls. We have infrastructure as code. Again, when you deploy your cloud in your production environment, sometimes you leverage infrastructure as code. So there's different technology. You have containers. You have Kubernetes. You have many, many, many services as part of your platform as a service. So the cloud is different. So this is one, of course. And with the difference, again, with the things that are new, again, there are new attack vectors that leverage this new technology. Of course, because it's new, there is still shortage of expertise. It's very hard to find cloud experts. It's very hard to find people that understand security and also understand cloud. And even if they understand cloud, sometimes they don't understand the multi-cloud environment. Again, you have different cloud providers. You have AWS, you have Azure, you have Google, you have Oracle, you have Ali, you have others, of course. You have sometimes hybrid, again. So even if you're a cloud expert and you understand one cloud, sometimes you don't understand the other cloud. So shortage of expertise is another thing that is very challenging for organizations. Tooling overload. If you take a look about what happened in the last probably 10, 15 years since organizations started or vendors started developing security solutions for the cloud, it was mostly point solutions. So we had different solutions that did different things. We had CWP, Cloud Workload Protection, that helped protect the workloads itself, mostly vulnerability management, for example. We had CSPM that focused on misconfiguration and compliance. We had other point tools, again. Open source. We had from the cloud providers, some tools from the cloud providers itself. So at the end, we had multi-tooling, which creates also some challenge. Sometimes it's very hard to understand what's going on. Again, you have different tools that say different things. And another part which is more challenging, I would say, in the cloud is the limited collaboration. It's very hard sometimes to collaborate on the cloud and to make sure that it's protected, because at the cloud, again, we have different stakeholders than in the on-prem. In the on-prem, the IT controlled everything. Security practitioners, again, controlled everything. They can put all the controls, and they were the main stakeholders. In the cloud, there are developers, DevOps, again, sometimes around identity, of course. You have IAM team, you have cloud security team. So everything also creates some complication in terms of how people work inside the organization. So all of that, again, create some of the challenges that at the end make cloud security more challenging for us. As I said, again, one thing, again, before I go to the next slide, if you think about it, again, and you do a survey, again, you can also ask yourself, of course. I'm sure, again, we can do a survey here. We did a survey, again, as Tenable, and 95% of organizations, again, reported on cloud security breach. So this is another thing that we are seeing that shows that this is very challenging and very hard, again, to protect. If you take a look about how, until recently, we used to work, as I said, with a point solution, we had several point solutions. We had CSPM, as I mentioned. We had CWP. We had infrastructure as code security. We had KSPM, again, to protect Kubernetes environments and containers. We had CDR, of course, it's a relatively new point solution that helps you detect and respond to threats in the cloud. And also we had KIM. KIM is relatively new, and most of the, I would say, organizations in the world don't use KIM. KIM is Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management that also helps you protect the access and analyze access and access governance and understanding identity risk and entitlement risk in the cloud, which when you think about it is, of course, very important in the cloud because identity is the new perimeter. So if you think about it, again, leveraging several point solutions, as I said, again, it's not a good answer. To take it a step further and talk more about the approach where we're going again with the CNAPP approach, we need to remember that in the cloud, in cloud security, I would say in general in security, context is holy grail. When you think about visibility, when you think about prioritizing and assessing risk in your environment, also on remediation, context is king. You really need to prioritize your risk based on everything that happens. Again, you want to take context from everything. You want to take context from your network environment. You want to take context from your identity part. You want to take context from your code, from your data, from your workloads. Again, context is the holy grail. So as part of course, of where we're going with our approach, CNAPP approach is an approach that takes an holistic view to cloud security and helps you understand more of the context and helps you understand and analyze and prioritize risk based on context. Let's take an example why it's so important. So in this I would say example, which is pretty similar to what happened in Capital One, again, Capital One breach several years ago, the several, or I would call it a toxic combination, again, taking several misconfiguration with vulnerabilities created a major risk for the organization, and at the end also created a breach. If you think about what happened, a misconfiguration made a machine to be publicly exposed. Again, it was publicly exposed without any need to be publicly exposed. This machine was also vulnerable. And because it was publicly exposed, the vulnerability was something that at the end, the attacker could leverage. And because this machine had privileged access to the data that it actually didn't need, it created a major breach. So think about it. Every one of these findings, if you take a look about on this finding as a one finding or one I would say risk element or one exposure or misconfiguration, it's very hard to assess again if it's a major risk to the organization without analyzing and understanding all the context. So if you take a look at the context and you take a 360 visibility approach, this will help you at the end really understand where you need to focus and what you need to remediate in order to reduce your risk to be exposed or to get breached. Another example that, of course, we also saw recently with the honest crypto stock market, another cybersecurity incident that started with Log4j vulnerability. So at the end, you might have several machines, maybe thousands of machines that are exposed to Log4j or Log4Shell. But if you analyze the context will help you focus on the things that matter. And in this case, at the end, there was a machine, there was a VM that had excessive permission that gave them access to AWS S3 bucket, to a data store, to a data resource in AWS. And this context that was very important to assess the risk, again, created a major breach. At the end, the attacker leveraged the vulnerability with the misconfigured identity over privileged identity. So at the end, it created a major breach for the organization and created the damage for the organization. So now I want to take a step further and talk more about what it means to take the CNAPP approach, what it means to what we call Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. And we'll use, again, a quote from Tom Kroll, who was one of the inventors, I would say, of the CNAPP framework inside Gartner. By using a consolidated platform to assess vulnerabilities in context, organization can reduce cost through vendor consolidation. This is one value, vendor consolidation. Again, you don't need to have different vendors for your cloud security. And improve productivity by prioritizing the most critical issues and reducing mean time to remediation. At the end, you want to take an holistic approach. You want to take one view that at the end allow you to take all the context, get visibility in one place, assess risk in one place, and remediate and shorten the time to remediate so you can be better protected as quickly as possible. I want to take us another step with what I talked about, the identity piece. Why a very strong leg, a very strong capabilities around what we call KIM, what we call, again, analyzing identity risk in the cloud is so important. So we are, again, as Tenable, again, and of course we're talking right now about the approach more, but we are taking the approach of the CNAPP, which is, as I said, holistic approach that takes all the point solution, and instead of having several point solutions that are integrated, everything is done in one product, one platform that at the end covers all the use cases. It covers all the use cases that used to be analyzed or used to be done by different point solution. So of course, we cover, as part of the CNAPP approach, we cover CSPM, which is all about governance and compliance of your cloud infrastructure, finding misconfigurations and making sure that you find them and remediate them. Infrastructure as code, as I said. Infrastructure as code security, making sure that you're analyzing your code as part of, before again you deploy it. Kubernetes security posture management. Governance and compliance of Kubernetes clusters and containers. CDR, again, cloud detection and response, analysis of the logs, of the CloudTrail, of the network log, of everything. CWPP, cloud workload protection platform, that analyze vulnerabilities in the cloud, and moving, again, and assessing all the risk around vulnerabilities in the cloud, and detect threats in their cloud workloads, or detect risks and exposures in your cloud workloads. And at the end, of course, also KIM. KIM, as a cloud infrastructure entitlement management, as I mentioned, helps you analyze and assess and govern identities, assess risk of identity risk in the cloud, and analyze access and entitlements, and give you visibility, deep visibility to all the entitlements on all the access in the cloud. That at the end, this is critical to prevent identity-based breaches. It's critical because of two things. One, it helps you reduce identity risk itself and reduce identity-related and identity-based attacks. But it also gives you all the context around the blast radius. When you're trying to assess other risks in your cloud, like vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, understanding the blast radius is key. If you want to understand if a vulnerability is very high severity or a low severity to your organization, you really need to understand what this machine can access. So that's another layer of why KIM is so important as part of the CNAPP approach, because blast radius in the cloud is, again, being done or being calculated again and understood, used the analysis of the identity and entitlements. Now I want to take a step further and talk about what are the stages that a CNAPP approach does in your environment and leverages in your environment in order to help you protect your environments in 10 steps. So we divided the 10 steps to 3 categories. One is everything around discovery. And we'll talk, of course, on every category separately, and we'll show you all the stages. You want to find all your asset relationship and access, and I'll show it more and more and more. The second category, you want to manage and prioritize risk. Again, you want to understand what risk you have in your organization, how to manage it, and how to prioritize it. That's another category. And the third category is how you scale, how you take this approach and scale within your organization. Make sure that you cover everything and you're well protected, and it's something that it works at scale in your organization. So we'll go step by step on each one of these stages. We'll start by discovering all assets. So the first stage, of course, I'm not sure if all of you know what you have in the cloud. Really understanding what you have, all the assets that they have, really having an inventory of what they have, all the assets, all the resources, all the workloads, identities, data. Sometimes it's very hard because it's not one cloud. Sometimes you have different clouds, so it needs to be also on multi-cloud. You need to Do it for your AWS environment, for your Azure environment, for your GCP, for your Ali Cloud. Again, you need to make sure that you discover all assets and understand all the assets that you have. So this is the first stage. The second stage, the second step, I would say, is to understand all relationship. Who has or what resources has relationship with what identities? What identities has access to these resources? So this is another step that you need to understand relationships between resources, identities, and resources, and other resources in the cloud. So that's another step. The third step is to fully analyze all the access to resources. So again, we're still in discovery. You still want to get visibility to what you have. So now, after you know what you have and which identities you have that can access things in your environment, you really need and you really want to analyze all the access. You really want to understand who can access what. And we need to remember that in the cloud, identities is not just users. Again, it's not just human identities. It's not just developers and DevOps and admins. It's also machine identities. Every VM, every machine that wants to access data or resources in the cloud leverages identity using service role, machine identities. So at the end, you also want to make sure that you understand for all of your identities, who can access what, for how long. Also, again, what privilege, like understand your privilege identities. What are your privilege identities? This is something that is very hard in the cloud. Again, we used to have in the on-prem administrators had access, admin access. In the cloud, sometimes a developer who had access or has access to, I don't know, all your data. But again, this developer is not admin in your cloud, but he has access to all your sensitive data. Is this a privilege access? Is this a privilege identity? Privilege user? Of course it's a privilege user. Again, you need to analyze that. So privilege users in the cloud are a little bit different. Again, it's more complex than in the on-prem. We're going to the second category, the category of managing risk and understanding risk. So before we analyze only the risk, you need to understand what compliance and what policies you want to enforce in your cloud environments. Many of you know what policies and what standards they need to support. Do you need to support SOC 2? Do you need to make sure that you're, I don't know, PCI compliant? Do you need to make sure that you're SOX compliant? I don't know. Every standard that you have, you need to make sure that you understand, and you need to make sure that you enforce it on your clouds. Every policy, and maybe you have different an enterprise policy or organizational policy that you support. So let's make sure that you first understand what compliance and enterprise policy you need. Second, which is the fifth step, manage the risk. You need to understand all the risks, where you have risks, where you have violations of your policies, where you have things that don't meet your compliance and your standards that you need to support. So we're starting by listing all of them. You need to see from low severity to high severity. This is, again, first, you need to see everything. You need to list everything. This is something that a CNAPP solution, a CNAPP approach, starts by listing everything. But it's not enough, because if you list everything, it can be sometimes tens of thousands of findings or vulnerabilities or misconfigurations. So you also need to make sure that you prioritize them based on a full stack context. For example, here, we have a screenshot from our solution, again, that talks more about toxic combination. You need to make sure that if you have a toxic combination like we showed in the example, you have vulnerability on a machine that is publicly exposed, that also that the virtual machine can also leverage and assume an identity that is overprivileged, of course, the context is key to understand that it's a critical risk to the organization, because an attacker can actually leverage it and create breach that can cause you a lot of damage. So at the end, you really need to make sure that you prioritize everything and focus on the things that are critical first, then on the high. And of course, depending on your organization and where you want to go, again, you can go from the critical to high to medium and lower, of course, but prioritization is key. Otherwise, you will never get to the things that actually create a lot of risk for your organization. Of course, after you prioritize all the risk and all the findings, you want to make sure that when you go to specific finding, you really can visualize everything and deep dive into the findings and understand everything around the finding. So you need, again, part of our CNAPP solution, or part of CNAPP solutions out there, understanding and intuitively visualizing to reveal and dig into the risk, it's so important because sometimes it's very hard to understand what's going on. You really need to see, to understand quickly what type of risk you have, what's the security gap, and to understand if you want to close it and remediate it and how quickly. So this is something that is very important, to visualize everything and to analyze and to see and to dive deeper to every risk and every finding that you have. Before we go to the next step, I want to show you like a very short, again, it's not a real demo again, but it will be like a screenshots that show you how it looks like, I would say, in reality. And we'll take the examples of the toxic combination that we talked about. Public workload with critical vulnerabilities with high privilege. So what you see again at the top of the upper part of the slide, you see a query, again, that this query at the end, again, shows you what we queried from our solution. Again, we queried network exposure that is, again, internet, again, it's publicly exposed, all IPs or wide IP range, vulnerability critical, and labor privilege. At the end, we queried, again, every toxic combination can be a query that you query on all your data and everything that you collected from your cloud. So you start again by doing this query. So you get all the workloads that at the end meet the criteria that you chose and make the toxic combination that we chose. Then we can drill down to a specific VM. We can take a specific VM. We can see again all the data on this VM, again, all the specific data, all the generic data, all the relevant data from the cloud, user data, everything that we can see on this specific EC2 instance. Again, EC2 instance, again, it's the VM, of course, from AWS. Then we can see all the risks that are attached to this workload. You can also see all the vulnerabilities. Again, we're trying to see and to get all the visibilities around the workload to decide, again, what we're going to do with this workload, what we're going to do with this risk. So seeing, again, all the vulnerabilities that we have. Again, we, of course, can query and can see only the critical ones, again, if you want. Again, so focusing on critical vulnerabilities, understanding, do we have critical vulnerabilities on this, again, on this machine? Of course, we have because this is what we query. But let's list all these vulnerabilities, understand what we have. And what, again, you can dive deeper as much as you want. Let's make sure that we understand how the network exposure looks like. Let's reveal all the network exposure. Let's see again in this graph, you can see that at the end, it's publicly exposed to the internet. Again, the 000 means that all IP addresses can, at the end, access this machine through this port, the specific port that you see there. We also have a specific IP that can access different ports. So understanding the network exposure and visualize that. Very easy again. Seeing everything, very easy to use and very easy to understand. Uncover all the permissions and specifically the excessive ones. So looking at all the things that this machine can access in your cloud, all the resources. So I don't know if you can see again, it's a very small. Again, we're showing it like from probably you don't see all the resources, but on the left side you see the VM itself, the virtual machine itself, the EC2 itself, and on the right side you see all the resources that it can access. And I'm not sure if you see again from far, but at the end there are different colors that you can see. If it's a red line, it means that this resource is never being used by this machine. So it's actually over excessive. Why this machine needs access to this resource? If it's yellow, it's sometimes against using some of the permissions. If it's black, it's used or it's accessed this resource. So at the end, analyzing the identity that is attached to this virtual machine, to this EC2, what this EC2 can do in the cloud, what it can access, and really understand if it's privileged, if it's excessive. Very important, again, so everything is visualized. Then you can go and drill down on the finding, as we said, as we talked about. You can go to a specific finding. Right now we're talking about the overprivileged IAM role. And you can see, again, in a very easy to understand what's going on, what's the context. Again, you see here the context. This role was created 3 years ago and was last active 4 hours ago. You see the specific workloads that leverage this identity, this role. You see all the context about that. And at the end, you also see this finding is has critical severity since the role has high severity, excessive permissions. And it's attached, of course, to internet-facing compute resource, and has critical vulnerabilities. So at the end, we analyze and explain you, and you can see very easy what's going on. You can read and understand, even for someone who's not expert in the cloud, can really understand what's going on. So this is, again, drilling down to the finding, and at the end, you can also go to the remediation. So this is take us to the next step. The next step is focusing on remediation. You want to understand that we prioritize the risk. We're focusing on the most important findings. We can, of course, focus on any finding that we want. But we're focusing on the most important ones, and we start by starting to remediate and also achieve least privilege. Again, so if you're reducing excessive permissions, you're achieving least privilege. So you can focus on remediation and also achieving zero trust. I'll talk in a sec about just-in-time, which is also very important in order to reduce the risk and prevent risk in your environment. So remediation can be with the remediation steps, showing you again what to do in order to remediate the risk. It can also, in many cases, when it's possible, show you what you need to do different. Again, what you need to do differently. What's the policy that you're using today, which is in the left side with red, and what's the policy that you should use? And you can also sometimes automatically remediate if you want. But if not, again, you can still take this code and implement it in your environment. So at the end, we're focusing about remediation. I want to touch for a sec about another model or another part of what we call just-in-time access. When you think about, again, remediating risk and preventing risk to your cloud, a big part of the risk is access risk, as we discussed about entitlement risk and permission risk. You want to make sure that you achieve least privilege. Again, zero trust and least privilege is very trendy things. You want to make sure that people and machine identities don't have too much permissions. Again, they don't have over-privileged identities or attached to them. Again, they cannot do things that they don't need to do. So that's the least privilege. We also offer, again, that's another level, if you're focusing on developers and DevOps and administrators, what we call human identities, sometimes you don't want to give them long-standing permissions at all. You want to make sure that, especially if they have needs to do something that is over or something's privileged, let's think of developer. Most of the time, this developer doesn't need to access the production environment. But sometimes this developer needs to fix things in the production environments and needs to have a privileged access to the production environments and to access some of the resources that are, again, can create risk to the environment. So we want to leverage what we call, again, we want to reduce the long-standing permissions, and we want to leverage what we call just-in-time capabilities, like a lightweight PAM. So just in time, it's also something that allows you to remediate and to reduce the risk to your environment and to prevent risk. Think about what it means just in time. So you have a requester. Let's say that you have a developer. This developer wants to have access to the AWS environment. So he's requesting access, and the approver gets notification. And at the end, the approver can approve access, the privileged access for this developer. So this is something that at the end can help you control better what kind of access you have on a regular basis. And when developers need privileged access, it's only for a limited time. Of course, after the approver approves this request, we notify, of course, AWS, and we leverage, again, the identity center in AWS to create the access for this developer. Of course, we also help use third-party integrations. Developers sometimes don't want to use portals, the different tools, so they want to use Slack or ServiceNow or other capabilities that you use to work in your organization, so we can also leverage that. So that's another important piece that at the end help you remediate and prevent risk to your environment. Again, so we talked about discovery. We talked about understanding all the assets, all the relationship, all the access. We understand about how you understand your compliance standards, list all your risks, understand how to prioritize the risks, make sure that you dive deeper and visualize everything, and at the end also remediate it. Now we're going to the next step with how we take it and operationalize it more and more and more at scale. So another step, what we call step 9, is make sure that we integrate everything with your CI/CD pipeline. We want to make sure that we shift left. We want to make sure that if you have a risk that is part of your code, infrastructure as code, let's say Terraform, for example, you want to make sure that we find this risk as soon as possible. You want to make sure that you remediate this risk as soon as possible. You don't want to deploy a misconfiguration to your production environment if you can stop this misconfiguration at the code. So taking it step back and shifting left to the CI/CD pipeline and to the code repository, it's a key part. So that's the next step. And the last step, if you're thinking about scale, you want to make sure that you create all the workflows and all the automation that you can in order to help your DevSecOps, maybe DevOps, maybe developers, close the risk at scale. Meaning, let's take, for example, if you find a risk in your environment, you find a misconfiguration in your production environment, you want to make sure that the DevOps or the developer who created this resource, or the owner of this resource, get notification. So you want to make sure that there is automation on the workflow here. You want to make sure also that it shows you exactly where this misconfiguration happened in the code, not just in the production environment, to show this developer all the proof and all the context around it. So closing the loop between security teams and developers and DevOps, it's a key element in order to take our approach, our security to the next step and make sure that it works at scale. Again, so that's the 10th step. Again, so we talked about discovery. We talked about managing and understanding risk and remediating risk. And we talked about how to take it to the next step and make sure that it's automated more. It works at scale in your organization, in your company. Let's summarize. Why CNAPP is the right approach? First, it's an holistic approach. Again, you don't have too many point solution. It's costs less because you don't have different vendors. Again, you pay to one vendor. Again, of course, total cost of ownership is less. But more important than that, at the end, you have all the context in one place. And you have the relevant context around visibility, around risk assessment, around everything, around remediation. Second, of course, it helps you comply and make sure that you meet your compliance needs. It helps you understand toxic combination, that it's different findings that are attached to each other and create a toxic combination. It's not one finding separately. Everything is combined together. It helps you prioritize easily and to focus on remediation and help you remediate as quickly as possible. And at the end, it's also saving time for your cloud security teams and also helps you manage with some of the shortage of expertise that all of us have because finding cloud experts is hard. So let's take it again to the next step and talk about, again, what we can do, I would say tomorrow, what we can do again in our organizations. So first, of course, we need to understand what we have, what kind of tools and data sources we use, where we have, again, potentially the highest risk, to understand again where we have our crown jewels, how we manage access and privileges in our organization. Of course, it's very, very, very important. Who set cloud security practices for vulnerability management and identity and entitlements and DevOps and everything. So first, we need to understand again what's going on in our organization. And then, of course, we need to, very excited about cloud security. Then, of course, we need, of course, to choose and to find, again, the solution that is right for us. What to look, again, in a CNAPP when you think about what's your CNAPP solution for you as an organization. Of course, as we discussed, understanding identity and access is key, and governing access is key. Usability and making sure that it's usable and intuitive. Because cloud is complicated, you want to make sure that the solution that you choose is friendly and easy to use And your team members, again, or you or your team members, again, can understand what's going on. Take all the complicated data in the cloud and making it simple. Very important. Understand all the context and reduce the noise. Again, you have tens of thousands, potentially tens of thousand findings and misconfigurations in the cloud, where you need to, again, to focus again in order to reduce the noise. And as we discussed, allows you the next step with automations and workflows and closing the gap with the DevOps and developers. So what we're going to do in the next 6 months, as we said, starting in with understanding what we have in our organization, what kind of teams, which teams we have again, and where we are today, and identify, of course, the decision makers and every concern and everything that you have in the organization. In the next 3 months, let's make sure that we understand and analyze more about the access, find out what's the tools and what the gaps that we have. Let's make sure that if we understand how to enforce this privilege. And later on, in the next 6 months, let's make sure that we analyze, we learn, we do proof of values, and we choose the right solution for us. The right CNAPP solution that works for our organizations. And of course, later on, define priorities and make sure that we leverage it and operationalize it in part of our, as part, again, in our organization. Thank you. Any questions? We still have 5-10 minutes if anyone wants to ask.
My question is on the licensing. How is it licensed?
Okay. Usually, licensing in the CNAPP approach or CNAPP solution is based on cloud workloads or resources, again, different naming for that. At the end, we count how many VMs we have, how many containers we have, how many, sometimes, again, other serverless functions. So at the end, it's focusing on compute resources, compute workloads, and at the end, based on that, you have the price for organization. So at the end, it's price according to the size of your cloud deployment.
The workload is dynamic because on a day it can be thousands, another day it can be hundreds, right?
So usually most of the CNAPP vendors take the average, what happened in the last 30 days, and average on that, and this is like how many licenses you need to buy.
Question for you. So if you're a Tenable customer, but you have a mixed environment, multiple clouds, but also on-prem and IoT, what do you do there? How do you integrate?
It's a great question. So Tenable takes what we call the consolidation exposure management approach, which also consolidate assessing the risk and your exposure around your IT, around your OT, around your IoT and cloud environment in one place together. So you can assess risk and understand the gaps in everything in your organization together. So at the end, it's not just the cloud. Cloud security is one of the elements, again, that Tenable delivers. And again, at the end, we also help customers protect their IT environment, protect their OT environment, and protect other environments in one platform.
Do you need Tenable plus Tenable.io licenses, or how does that work?
So again, at the end, we have different ways to license. Again, you can visit our booth and we can explain to you again. So we have on Tenable One that at the end is one license, or you can buy different products in.
Thank you.
Would you mind come to the mic so that everyone can hear? This is the requirement for the RSA. Sorry about that.
I'm still here again if you prefer to ask me privately. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
And if you do have a brownfield installation, like for example, you have a CNAPP from Wiz, how would you integrate, or is it integrated already?
So we are, again, in so many, as our CNAPP approach, we're also a CNAPP vendor, so we compete with some other CNAPP vendors.
Yeah, I understand.
But we can also sell specific, if you want, best of breed KIM as part of our solution, and it can integrate with your all approach in your environment. So you can live side by side with other CNAPP vendors.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you. Good, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.